Remnant. We all know what it is at this point. It's spirit juice poured into metal. Someone gets killed in a pretty nasty way, they get metal thrown in their general direction, and boom, you've got Remnant. Simple, right? At least, we thought it was simple. But now, I'm not so sure. See, if we take agony into consideration, and we should, then the idea seems to fall apart. Here, let me explain. Agony, the substance, seems to originate from the emotion of the same name. Thank you, Phineas Taggart. Someone gets killed in a pretty nasty way, they get something, it doesn't have to be metal, but it certainly can be, thrown in their general direction, and boom, you've got agony. Which is exactly the same process as creating Remnant. The only difference is that it's not always metal, and I don't think Remnant needs to be either. So, what gives? If you get them both in the exact same way, then how do you control which one you get? Does it flip a coin while it's forming? Is it based on getting the horrifying nature of their death into a specific sweet spot that's bad enough to create Remnant, but not bad enough to make agony? Like, if two people got killed, but one person's death was a little more gross and involved, would they produce agony while the other produces Remnant? Well, today we're gonna try figuring that out. Drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and let's start off with the basics, listing out all of the dead people that we know are haunting something. We've got the original core four of Susie, Fritz, Gabriel, and Jeremy, plus Cassidy, who is, you know what, we'll talk about her later. We've also got Dave the crying child, David the only sometimes crying child, Liz the sister of the crying child, Charlie the child that we saw crying exactly one time, so I'm counting it for the sake of the bit, and the adult that's seemingly obsessed with this stuff, William Afton. He probably cried when he got springlocked too, actually. Those are our confirmed Remnant-based possessions. Now you might be wondering, what makes all of these character deaths different from the other ones throughout the series? Such as the DCI and all of the kids killed by the fun times. In every example I just named, there was some kind of bond between the person that died and the respective character that they ended up possessing. These attachments were what allowed them to form Remnant, which led to them possessing the animatronics. Meanwhile, for things like the DCI and the fun times, there wasn't any attachment. These children didn't form a meaningful bond with these animatronics, and, as a result, no Remnant was formed when they died, and there was no possession. This is most prevalent with the fun times. These things were literally eating the kids, and despite that, despite the fact that there were literally dead kids stuffed inside of the animatronics, the fun times don't get possessed. Well, most of them don't. There's only one exception, Circus Baby, because, like I said, there's an attachment there. Elizabeth was absolutely enamored with Circus Baby, the robot her father built.
Just for me?
And begging.
Daddy, just once let me go play with her.
So, when Elizabeth finally got to spend some time with Baby, and proceeded to get grabbed and
twisted into a meat pretzel,
Remnant was able to form. It's part of why Baby is so different from the rest of the fun times, properly speaking and plotting so much. Because unlike the rest of the fun times, she has all of one child's Remnant inside of her. Speaking of guys making animatronics specifically for their daughters, there's another daughter in this franchise that had an animatronic specifically for them. Charlie. Not only did Charlie die with the puppet directly on top of her, but the animatronic was made for the sake of protecting her from harm. Or at least repurposed for it, which would feel the same for a little kid. And I don't know about you guys, but if I was a neglected child whose father made a robot to do the job of parenting in his place, I'd probably get pretty attached to... Hey, do you guys remember the Mimic? Listen, I've talked about Mimic being haunted several times on this channel already, and this lines up perfectly with the idea. David's death is almost a direct copy of what happened with Charlie and the puppet. The child, left alone outside, dies. The animatronic meant to be in charge of caring for them goes out after the child, finding them dead. David then goes on to possess this endoskeleton. This is because, even more so than almost any other example on this list, David loved Mimic. Mimic was more family to David than Edwin ever was. So to say that he was attached to it is a massive understatement. And speaking of David, it's time for a God David-ism. Let's talk about Dave. He's an interesting example because, on one hand, he's kind of afraid of the animatronics. But despite this, he views the characters themselves as his friends, and even carries one of them around with him, Fredbear. Fredbear is the voice he hears at the end of the game, talking him through the final moments of his life. Just like David before him, he loves Fredbear, who he views as his only friend. And he has more of an attachment to it than to Michael or William. And speaking of, ironically enough, if there's anyone in this series with an emotional attachment to a character, it's William. Which partially doesn't make sense due to the fact that he is the character, but gods, him having a strong enough emotional attachment to his own self-insert OC to form Remnant is actually entirely in character for him. Except, I don't think this is exactly what happened. I find it far more likely that a certain someone used their power to keep him alive. And there's a few reasons why. The first is that all of our examples of Remnant creation seem to have one thing in common: love. That's what Remnant is founded on. It's what causes these possessions to be so much stronger in the first place. And I think that this is the reason that, despite the fact that it definitely happened and anyone who disagrees is coping, the DCI is never brought up again. Just like how all of the kids who died literally inside of the Fun Times, barring Elizabeth, are never brought up again. Because there's no Remnant. The Fun Times are rented out by the day to go to birthday parties, and the FNAF 2 location wasn't even open a whole month. These things weren't around children long enough to form emotional attachments. So there's no Remnant. Nothing to bring the characters back into the narrative, because the foundation for it never existed in the first place. Instead of Remnant, the only thing that the DCI and the Fun Times ever created was agony. The only thing that William Afton ever found in his quest to use Remnant to gain control over life and death. Because he was never quite able to grasp the feeling of love. We see this in how he treats his children, other people's children, and his characterization in the movie and the novels. He might think he understands it, but he doesn't. This is why, even in death, I don't believe he creates his own Remnant. Instead, when he gets chased into his suit and springlocked, the vengeful spirit anchors him to this world instead. And to think that none of that would have ever happened if he just paid attention to his kids. The secret to everything he was looking for, the answer to all of his questions, literally lied in his youngest children. Here, let me bring up an example I touched on earlier. The Fun Times. Take a look at the blueprints for Funtime Freddy. He has 3 functions on it, all of which assist him in kidnapping children. Hell, there's a kid's body literally in the blueprint for it. And yet, Funtime Freddy never gets possessed. Not one time. None of the Fun Times do, except for Circus Baby. And of all of the Fun Times, this is the one animatronic that had a child with an emotional attachment to it. Circus Baby had a fan. A child who oh so desperately wanted to just see her, play with her. And when that moment leads to tragedy, that child is the only one who goes on to possess a Funtime animatronic. It wasn't because of proximity. It wasn't because of efficiency. It wasn't because of anything that William was ever obsessed with. It was the one thing he rejected at every possible turn: affection. And so, at the end of his journey, after all of the research and development he put into life and death itself, he was left with only one thing: agony. Which begs the question, what actually is agony? We've been able to properly identify what Remnant is and how it works. But what about agony? Is it actually any different? Well, the only time we ever get any explanation for agony is in Frights by Dr. Phineas Taggart. Dr. Taggart is a very peculiar man. He specifically studies human emotions and claims to be able to create a mental shield of light by closing his eyes and concentrating. But more interestingly, he also has a room with a pneumatic seal dedicated to housing objects that are said to be haunted. However, he doesn't actually believe that things are haunted in the sense that he doesn't believe in ghosts. Instead, he believes that objects are energized by agony. He theorizes that the more negative an emotion is, the more powerful it is, and that, therefore, agony is the most powerful emotion of them all. He recognizes the power of positive emotions as well, specifically calling out the power of love, but plainly states that other researchers who call it the most powerful emotion are wrong. And he's proven wrong for literally the entirety of the stingers. But before he gets proven wrong, he attempts his magnum opus. He tries to literally cause the possession of an object through agony. His plan is simple. He has a machine that's meant to coalesce all of the energy from various haunted objects that he has stored, and put them into a broken endoskeleton that he ordered online. He uses two objects in particular. The first one is a 3-foot-tall white doll covered in drawings done in colored markers. He removes the head of the doll and puts it onto the endoskeleton. The second item is a broken animatronic dog, which is described as making Phineas feel especially uncomfortable. The book implies this one really gives off that agony vibe. He removes the battery pack from inside of the dog, where its heart would have been, and slots it into the endoskeleton's chest. And it worked. After being provided with a power source, the endoskeleton begins to move. And then Phineas's head exploded. Like, that's barely even an exaggeration. He tried to defend himself with his mental shield of light, but it proved hilariously ineffective against his own creation. Here's the direct quote. 3 things happened. Phineas saw the being's battery pack pulse bright red. He suddenly sensed danger and attempted to throw up a mental shield. He began to convulse, grabbing his head to attempt to contain the excruciating pain that annihilated his consciousness. His creation proceeded to run off, find a cloak from Taggart's belongings. Why did he have a cloak? And become the titular character of the Stingers, the Stitchwraith. So, what just happened? At first glance, it looks like he was right. His agony-infused items caused a possession, and that possession was so strong that it just so happened to be enough to kill him. It can even mummify people with just a touch. So, Taggart was right. Right? Well, no. His research is fundamentally flawed, because we know that ghosts are real in this series. It's something that's been told to us time and time again. So going into this, we know that Taggart isn't entirely right about this. He is right about one thing. Agony is real. It exists. And he did cause a possession. Kind of. More accurately, he combined multiple possessions. If you've read the relevant Stitchline stories, and you've been paying attention to this video, then you might know what I'm about to say. The doll head that gets attached to the Stitchwraith in this chapter is not infused with agony. The doll in question is from the story The Real Jake, which is about a 9-year-old boy named Jake with an aggressive form of cancer. His mother is dead, and his father is overseas in the military, so he's left with a live-in caretaker named Margie. But Jake has one other friend that he lives with, a doll in his cabinet named Simon, who promised to stay in that cabinet until Jake was well enough to walk over to it and take him out. Unbeknownst to him, the doll is actually his father, who calls Jake every night. And every night, he asks Jake what the real Jake did that day. Or in other words, asks what Jake would have done that day if he wasn't sick. Every time that Jake answers that question, his caretaker Margie walks into his room later while he's asleep, and draws on the Simon doll to reflect the adventures of the real Jake. And while drawing on the doll, she wonders, if you were to infuse an object with enough love and intention, would it have life? And as it turns out, the answer to that question is yes. Because later in the story, when Jake finally succumbs to his illness, the door to Simon's cabinet has opened up, without any of the adults realizing it. Jake's affection for this doll was so great, so powerful, that despite the doll being all the way on the other side of the room, when he died, his spirit, his remnant, found its way to Simon and possessed it. The Stitchwraith is made up of 3 things: an endoskeleton, the Simon doll, and the fetch battery. And going off of what the story tells us, the Simon doll is by no means an agony item. This is the most blatant example of a remnant possession we have ever seen. So what about the battery? Well, we don't know a whole lot about how the battery pack got possessed. I mean, we've seen Fetch separately in his own story, and we've seen the spirit possessing him, Andrew, in his own story as well. But as for when and how these two met, Andrew just kind of found it in the warehouse after Afton exploded all over the place. So the main thing we have to go off of is how Andrew acts. And boy, is there a lot to unpack there. Andrew is everything that comes to mind when you hear the word agony. He's rude, he denies connections despite not so secretly craving them, he attaches his vengeful spirit to the soul of a British guy who killed him and tries to prolong his life and suffering for as long as he possibly can while subjecting him to a personalized hell that caused one of the longest standing and stupidest debates in the history of the entire franchise. You know, usual angry kid stuff. And since we never see a connection between Andrew and Fetch, it's highly unlikely that there's any remnant there, meaning this is an agony-infused item. Which would explain why Andrew and Jake are so different from each other. Andrew is agony, and Jake is remnant. Andrew wants to hurt everyone in his way, while Jake just wants to help people out. Except, Andrew feels remarkably like a whole person, doesn't he? An angry one, sure. Vengeful, absolutely. However, I do have reason to believe that he might not be sporting that much agony of his own. The other entity within the Stitchwraith, the one that only wants to cause pain and suffering without ever doing so much as saying a word until it gets an opportunity to take control. The man from room 1280, aka William Afton. Although this isn't the Afton we're used to. This is likely just all of the agony he produced while being tormented by Andrew. It's also seemingly the only thing preventing Andrew from moving on, as, when Jake breaks Andrew free from the entity, he vanishes immediately. Jake is then able to override all of the agony that's left in the stingers, which is made obvious by all of his interactions with, and his inevitable fight against, Eleanor. Eleanor is more or less just a being made of pure agony. We see her farm agony right from the source multiple times in the stingers, but what she truly wants is a remnant. Either because it's more powerful or just because it has different properties, but the point is, she wants remnant, and will do whatever it takes to get it. So despite Taggart's insistence that agony is the strongest emotion, he's just wrong about that. The story tells you, time and time and time again, that remnant, formed due to attachments involving love, is infinitely more desirable than agony ever was. The one thing that both William Afton and Eleanor were after for their entire stories eluded them because they rejected everything else in their lives in the pursuit of it. And it's what ultimately ended them. Jake was able to overpower Eleanor and trap her completely before making his way to the pit at the end of his story. To close things off, I want to wrap back around to someone I mentioned at the start of the video, Cassidy. Considering what we see in Ultimate Custom Night compared with what we see with Andrew in the Man in Room 1280, it also feels like Cassidy would be an agony-based possession, as these two characters seem to be doing more or less the same thing. Except they aren't. Cassidy isn't tethered to William's spirit to keep them stuck in this plane. They're in Golden Freddy. They don't keep William alive in a hospital room. They trap his spirit in UCN with at least a few others. They're shown to be helping Dave find his memories within the survival logbook. There's also the issue of this spirit most likely being Cassidy. Andrew worked alone until the Stitchwraith, but Cassidy was part of the MCI and worked together with the other kids to trap him in the back room, where he ended up getting springlocked. Overall, Cassidy doesn't read as an agony spirit to me, at least not fully. With these being complex human emotions, it's unlikely that anyone would only feel one emotion as they died. It's also unlikely that they stopped feeling emotions after they died. If they couldn't be changed, then strategies like Happiest Day or David's story time would have no effect on the spirits. While they must have some intensely negative feelings toward William, likely related to having a particularly agonizing death compared to the rest of the kids, they seem to care for the crying child in the survival logbook. This transmutability is also shown off in the Stitchwraith stingers, when Jake returns to the pit and begins helping the agonized spirits within. The nature of the energy trapped inside is altered by changing the emotions connected to it. Because of this, it seems to me that Cassidy spends a decent amount of time in flux, torn between their hatred for William and the fact that they care for their friends. Ultimately, they allow their hatred to consume them, and they and their friends have to suffer for it. Or maybe I finally lost my last marble. With that said, I want to say thank you to my channel members, Ballsfrog, Embrisk, Crashmaster, Kepi, and Cryonide. I'll see you guys in the next one, and have a fazerific day!